Hey everyone, I've noticed that many of you are enjoying the videos, but most of you haven't subscribed yet. We're super close to hitting 1,000 subscribers, and your support could help us reach that milestone. If you're enjoying the content, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It really makes a huge difference and helps us keep creating more awesome content. Thank you so much for watching and supporting. I was making coffee when I first noticed it. Amanda's phone lit up on the kitchen counter, vibrating softly with a notification. It wasn't unusual for her phone to go off. She got messages from friends, work, her family all the time. But this was different. The name that flashed on the screen was one I'd never seen before, David. Just David. No last name, no identifying details. "Who's David?" I asked casually, pouring the steaming coffee into her favorite ceramic mug, the one we bought on our last vacation to Mexico. I didn't want to come off as accusatory, but I must have sounded off because Amanda's head jerked up, eyes wide for a fraction of a second before she smiled, too quickly. "David? Oh, just a guy from work. He's helping with the new campaign." She shrugged it off, reaching for the phone, her fingers tapping a reply faster than I'd ever seen. But that brief, flickering look of surprise, the tightening of her lips, the way her eyes shifted as she spoke, seared itself into my brain. It was the look of someone caught off guard, a look I hadn't seen in years. I pushed the doubt aside, choosing to believe her. At least, that's what I told myself. Yet the rest of the day, my mind kept circling back to that name. David. Why hadn't she mentioned him before? Amanda was a talker, especially about work. She had a habit of droning on about coworkers and office politics. But David? He'd never come up. I tried to brush it off. I'd never been the paranoid type. Amanda and I had been married for 8 years, and while we had our ups and downs, I'd never questioned her loyalty. But that small seed of doubt planted itself firmly in my mind. By the time I lay in bed that night, listening to Amanda's soft breathing beside me, it had taken root. The next morning, I started noticing things I hadn't paid attention to before. She'd started dressing differently for work, more polished, sharper. The kind of outfits she used to wear when we were first dating, and her perfume. When did she start wearing that expensive scent again? The one she'd shelved years ago, saying it was too extravagant for everyday use? The more I looked, the more the details began to line up in a disturbing pattern. Over the next few weeks, I kept track of these changes, everyone feeding into that gnawing feeling that something was off. Amanda started coming home later, claiming she was swamped with work. Business dinners, she'd say, strategy meetings. But then there were the unexplained absences on weekends, the sudden girls' nights out that never used to happen. Each time I questioned her, she brushed me off with a dismissive laugh or a patronizing smile. I started to feel like an idiot for even asking. "God, Steve, you sound like a jealous teenager," she'd say, her voice dripping with exasperation. "Can't a woman have a little space without you hovering over her?" A woman having space, that I could understand. But something about the way she spoke, the arrogance in her tone, the ease with which she deflected my questions. It wasn't just space she was asking for, it was distance. The first real crack in the facade came one evening when she was in the shower. Her phone buzzed again, and I glanced at it almost reflexively. Another message from David. My heart tightened. I knew I shouldn't, but I picked up the phone and opened the message. "Can't wait to see you again tomorrow night." My blood ran cold. I scrolled up, eyes scanning the conversation. It was brief, flirtatious. They were careful not to say anything overtly incriminating, but the tone, the playful banter, the intimate familiarity was unmistakable. This wasn't a professional relationship. This was personal. I set the phone down just as I heard the shower turn off. My hands were trembling. When Amanda came out, wrapped in a towel, I forced a smile, pretending I hadn't just seen the evidence of her betrayal. I didn't confront her right then. I wasn't ready. I needed to know more. The days that followed were a blur of paranoia and gut-wrenching uncertainty. Every interaction we had was tainted by what I knew. Amanda, blissfully unaware, carried on as if nothing was wrong. She still kissed me goodbye in the mornings, Still sent me those pointless texts during the day, asking about my lunch, or reminding me to pick up milk on the way home. But I couldn't ignore the growing distance between us. The physical space between our bodies in bed at night, the way her smile never quite reached her eyes when she looked at me. It was like I was living with a stranger. My thoughts spiraled into dark places. I'd find myself staring at her, trying to decipher the lies hidden behind her smile. Was this all an act? How long had she been pretending? Had she ever really loved me, or was that a lie too? The suspicion morphed into obsession. I started checking her phone more frequently, monitoring her calls, her messages. I tracked her movements online, looked up every social media post she liked or commented on, searching for connections, patterns, anything that would give me a clue about who this David really was. Amanda noticed my change in behavior, of course. How could she not? I was quieter, more withdrawn. I started avoiding her touch, pulling away when she reached for me. It was a subtle shift, but it was there. "What's going on with you, Steve?" she asked one night, her brow furrowed. "You've been acting weird lately." "I'm just tired," I replied, forcing a yawn. "Work's been crazy." "Yeah? Well, maybe you should take it easy." Her tone was nonchalant, but I caught the slight edge in it, almost worried. Good. I wanted her to feel uneasy. I wanted her to know that something was coming, even if she couldn't see it yet. The worst part was pretending everything was fine while my mind churned with doubts and suspicions. But I couldn't confront her, not yet. If I did, she'd just deny it, twist my words until I ended up apologizing. No, I needed to be sure. I needed concrete proof, and I needed a plan. I spent hours at night, sitting in my car down the street from our house, staring at her text messages, scrolling through her calendar, piecing together her lies. Every lie I uncovered felt like a dagger to the chest, but it also fueled my resolve. I wasn't going to let her play me for a fool. Not anymore. One night after she'd gone to bed, I stayed up, staring at her phone until my eyes burned. I deleted the messages from David I'd read earlier, making sure she'd never know I'd been snooping. But I saved every one of them in my head, replaying the conversations over and over. My thoughts raced with 100 different scenarios. Would I confront her at home? Would I show up at one of their secret meetings, catch her in the act? But that would be too easy for her, wouldn't it? Too clean. I wanted her to suffer, to feel the pain I was feeling, slowly, steadily, until she broke. By the time I finally climbed into bed, Amanda was fast asleep. I watched her for a long time, the rise and fall of her chest in the dim light. She looked so peaceful, so content. But it was a lie, all of it, and I was going to tear that lie apart, piece by piece. I tried to talk to people about it, friends, family, anyone who might give me some perspective. But their responses were dismissive, almost condescending, like I was the one who'd lost his mind. They told me I was overreacting, paranoid that Amanda would never cheat. "She's been through a lot lately," my sister said. "Give her some space." Space. That word again. It was all anyone seemed to say. I sat across from my best friend Mark one evening, hoping to get some clarity. "She's changed, Mark. She's distant, secretive." I leaned forward, desperate for him to understand. "And there's this guy, David. I've found texts. I can't shake the feeling that—" "Steve, come on," he interrupted, shaking his head with a skeptical smile. "You're imagining things. Amanda's not like that. Maybe she's stressed or worried. You know how demanding her job is." I clenched my jaw, feeling the familiar frustration rise. It was the same response I got from everyone else. They'd all bought into Amanda's perfect wife facade. And why wouldn't they? She'd been the charming, attentive spouse for years, always knowing the right thing to say, always presenting herself as the ideal partner. They didn't see the small cracks, the ones that widened every time I looked at her now. She'd built a wall around herself, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't break through. It wasn't just the physical distance, it was the emotional void that widened between us every day. "Look, if something's really going on, you'll find out eventually," Mark said, his voice laced with forced patience. "But don't go looking for problems where there aren't any. You'll drive yourself crazy." Crazy, that word hit a nerve. It's what Amanda used to say when I questioned her behavior. "You're being crazy, Steve." She'd laugh off my concerns. "You need to get a grip." And like a fool, I'd back off, convincing myself that I was the one imagining things. But I wasn't. I knew that now. I stopped talking to people about it after that. Their pitying looks and patronizing smiles only added to the isolation I felt. The more they dismissed me, the more trapped I became in my own head, where doubts twisted and expanded, growing into a thick, inescapable fog. And with every evasion, every excuse Amanda threw at me, my suspicions grew sharper, more defined. I started paying closer attention to the details, the kind you could only catch if you were looking. I noticed unexplained charges on our credit card bills, restaurants I'd never heard of, purchases from boutique stores that weren't her usual places. And then there were her absences, nights out she never used to have, weekends spent catching up with old friends who never seemed to have names. Whenever I asked, she deflected or turned the conversation back on me, like I was the one behaving suspiciously. "What's with all the questions?" she'd ask, eyes narrowing in annoyance. "Why are you acting like this?" Her confrontational tone only deepened my resolve. She was hiding something, something big. But I still had no concrete proof, not yet. The turning point came late one evening when I decided to take a more direct approach. Amanda was out, dinner with colleagues, she claimed, so I seized the opportunity to dig deeper. I'd seen her type her password on her laptop enough times to memorize it, and I told myself I wasn't crossing any lines by using it. I just needed answers. My hands trembled as I logged in. Her emails revealed nothing unusual at first: routine correspondence, work-related discussions. But then I saw the name, David. I clicked on the thread, my heart hammering in my chest. The first few messages were innocent enough, but as I scrolled up, the tone shifted. Their conversations moved from lighthearted jokes to flirtatious exchanges. Words like "miss you" and "can't wait to see you again" leapt out at me, searing themselves into my brain. And then I found the photos, pictures of them together at places she'd never mentioned. A cozy little cafe downtown, an upscale hotel lobby. She looked happy. Happier than she'd been with me in months. But it was the video that shattered any remaining doubt. A short, grainy clip of Amanda and David in a hotel room. Their voices were soft, intimate. She laughed at something he said that sounded achingly familiar, but there was a warmth in it I hadn't heard in so long. I shut the laptop, bile rising in my throat. It wasn't just an affair. It was a life she'd built without me, a future she'd envisioned with someone else. Everything we had, our home, our plans, our marriage, meant nothing to her. She'd replaced it all with him. For a long time, I sat there, my mind numb, my body paralyzed. The betrayal felt physical, like a knife twisted in my gut. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my wife, was a lie. Rage swelled inside me, hot and suffocating. I wanted to confront her, to scream at her, to demand why she'd done this. But something stopped me. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was the sudden, chilling realization that an outburst would be exactly what she expected. No. I wouldn't give her that satisfaction. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to think rationally. This wasn't the time to act impulsively. I needed to be smart about this. Amanda had been playing me for a fool for who knows how long, and if I confronted her now, she'd just turn it around, make me out to be the bad guy. I needed a plan. From that moment on, I began to watch her more closely. I kept up the pretense, pretending I knew nothing, while secretly gathering every bit of information I could. I started tracking her movements, logging the times she left and returned, the places she claimed to go versus the locations she ended up at. It was a delicate game of cat and mouse, and I made sure not to tip my hand too early. The inconsistencies piled up. A business trip to Chicago that never showed up on her work calendar. A weekend in the Hamptons she spent with David, not her college friends, like she'd said. Every lie she told me, I documented. I even installed a small tracking device in her car, something I'd ordered online, easy to conceal. Watching the little red dot move across the map, knowing exactly where she was and who she was with. It was exhilarating in a sick way. I knew I should have felt guilty, but I didn't. Not anymore. Then one evening, she left her laptop unattended again. This time I went deeper. I found a hidden folder buried under layers of subfolders. Inside were more photos, videos, and emails, spanning months. They were planning a future together, a house in the suburbs, vacations to exotic places, even discussing children. My chest tightened painfully at that last one. I sat back, breathing hard. This wasn't just an affair. She was preparing to walk out of our marriage entirely, to leave me. But why hadn't she yet? Why was she still here, pretending everything was fine? I kept scrolling, and then I saw it, a series of recent messages. David was pushing her to finalize things, to take the last step and leave me. But Amanda hesitated. She talked about our finances, how complicated it would be. And there it was, the real reason she hadn't left yet. Money. The house was in both our names, our bank accounts joint. She was scared to make a move until she knew what her financial situation would look like. And David, impatient, greedy David, was starting to get fed up with waiting. A dark, grim satisfaction settled over me. That was it then. Amanda wasn't staying because of some lingering affection or guilt. She was biding her time, weighing her options, calculating how much she could take from me before she jumped ship. Well, if it was about money, I'd make sure she got exactly what she deserved. I spent the next few days solidifying my evidence. Screenshots of every incriminating message, copies of their plans, proof of her deceit. I stored everything on a separate hard drive, something she'd never be able to find. But I didn't stop there. I began siphoning money from our accounts, slowly, discreetly, just enough that she wouldn't notice right away. I contacted a lawyer inquiring about how to protect my assets in case of a separation. Every move I made was calculated, precise. By the time Amanda noticed the shift in our finances, it would be too late. I'd have control of everything, and she'd be left scrambling. With every new piece of information I uncovered, my anger hardened into something cold, unyielding. This wasn't about love or betrayal anymore. It was about survival. I watched Amanda, pretending everything was normal, all the while knowing that every smile, every touch, every lie she fed me was bringing me one step closer to my goal. Let her think she was still in control, because soon I'd be the one pulling the strings. For the next few days, I shut myself off from the outside world. I spent hours holed up in my study, every moment replaying the details of my marriage through this new, bitter lens. I sifted through old photos, messages, and emails, trying to pinpoint when it had all gone wrong. I'd never realized how meticulously Amanda had set up her betrayal, how every conversation, every excuse, every false smile had been a careful step in a plan she'd likely been crafting for months, if not longer. My anger, initially red-hot and uncontrollable, hardened into a cold, calculating focus. I needed to understand not just how she'd managed to deceive me, but why. Why stay when she had no intention of making this work? Why prolong the agony for both of us? But the answer was clear. Control. Amanda thrived on it. This was never about love or lust. It was about power. Keeping me in the dark, maintaining that upper hand, it was all part of her game. She had me exactly where she wanted, a clueless, doting husband, oblivious to the truth while she maneuvered everything behind my back. Well, not anymore. After a sleepless night, I sat down at my desk, staring at the wall of evidence I'd gathered. Every piece was organized: bank statements, GPS logs, screenshots of conversations, even photos of her and David in places she'd never have dared to take me. It was damning, all of it. Enough to destroy her reputation, to shatter the image of the successful, polished woman she presented to the world. But was that enough? No, not for me. Not anymore. Destroying Amanda's reputation would be satisfying, but too quick, too easy. I needed something more permanent. Something that would ruin not just her image, but everything she'd built her new life on. Something that would make her wish she'd never even considered leaving me. First, I needed to understand who David really was. If Amanda thought he was her ticket to a new life, Then he must have something she needed: wealth, power, connections. But there was more to him. My gut told me he wasn't just a rich lover, showering her with gifts and attention. There was something darker lurking beneath the surface. I spent hours researching, combing through every scrap of information I could find: company records, social media profiles, articles, and even the dark corners of the internet. I discovered that David wasn't just some affluent businessman. His past was littered with rumors of shady dealings, whispers of corporate espionage, backdoor financial manipulations, even links to organized crime. Amanda had jumped from the frying pan into the fire without even realizing it. She'd thought she was leaving me for someone powerful, someone who could give her the life she wanted. But she'd become entangled in something far more dangerous. And if I played this right, I could turn that danger against her. That was my first realization. I didn't need to destroy Amanda directly. I needed to unravel her relationship with David, turn him against her, make him see her as a liability, something to be disposed of, not cherished. That was the key to my plan. Let him do the dirty work for me. I compiled everything I had on David: his connections, his suspected crimes, the people he'd been associated with. If Amanda ever thought she was in control, she'd find out soon enough just how wrong she was. She'd become the prey in a game she didn't even know she was playing. But how to make the first move? I needed to plant the seeds of doubt, make David question everything she'd told him. It had to be subtle, anonymous, something that couldn't be traced back to me. I spent the next few days drafting letters, making anonymous calls, dropping hints to people I knew would pass the information along. I laid out Amanda's duplicity in excruciating detail, framing it in a way that suggested she was using David as much as he was using her. I hinted at other lovers, at hidden accounts, at plans to take more than just his money. It wasn't long before the cracks started to show. Amanda was on edge more often, her eyes darting to her phone with a nervous intensity. She started avoiding certain calls, spending hours on the phone with David in hushed, frantic whispers. The tension between them was palpable, and I watched it all unfold with a grim satisfaction. But then came the complication I hadn't anticipated. One evening, as I was cross-referencing some of David's older financial records, I stumbled onto a name, someone he'd been involved with in a business deal that had gone south years ago. A man who'd vanished, only to turn up months later, floating face down in a river. My blood ran cold. I thought David was dangerous, but I hadn't understood just how dangerous. This wasn't a man who merely ruined careers or bankrupted people. He destroyed lives, eliminated threats with a ruthlessness that bordered on sociopathy. Amanda didn't know. She couldn't know. If she had any inkling, she'd have run far and fast. But that didn't mean she was safe. The more David's suspicion grew, the more likely he was to see her as a problem to be dealt with. I had to be careful. One wrong move, and I'd be signing Amanda's death warrant or warrant. I sat back, considering my options. There was no backing out now, but I had to change my approach. I couldn't let this escalate into something uncontrollable. I needed to make sure Amanda suffered. Yes, but I also needed to keep her alive, at least long enough to see everything fall apart around her. I refined my plan, taking into account David's instability and violent tendencies. I'd make Amanda appear not just unfaithful, but disloyal, someone who might betray him to save herself, someone he couldn't trust, no matter how much she begged or pleaded. I created fake emails, carefully fabricated documents suggesting she was gathering information on him, preparing to go to the authorities. I knew David's type. Paranoia ran deep. All it would take was a gentle nudge in the right direction, and he'd start seeing betrayal everywhere. The guilt gnawed at me sometimes late at night when the house was dark and silent. Was this really about revenge, or was I becoming as manipulative as they were? I pushed the thought away, focusing on the anger, the betrayal. This wasn't just about Amanda's affair. It was about reclaiming my life, about taking back control she'd stolen from me, piece by piece. I'd make her pay for what she did. I'd make sure she knew that she'd chosen wrong. wrong, not just with David, but in thinking she could ever outsmart me. It didn't take long for the strain to show. I noticed Amanda's hands trembling when she thought I wasn't looking. She jumped at sudden noises, her gaze darting around like a cornered animal. Whatever David was saying to her, it was working. The trust between them was eroding, replaced by suspicion and fear. But I knew David. He wasn't the kind to just walk away. He'd dig, investigate, look for proof of her betrayal until he was satisfied. I needed to stay one step ahead. I set up an anonymous email address and started sending David tips about Amanda's supposed meetings with lawyers, her inquiries into whistleblower protections. Each message was crafted to fan the flames of his paranoia without giving away too much. I wanted him desperate, unhinged, and it worked. Soon Amanda stopped coming home some nights. When she did, her eyes were red, her face pale and drawn. She avoided me as much as possible, barely speaking. Part of me felt a sick pleasure at her unraveling, but there was another part, one I tried to bury, that almost pitied her. Almost. She wasn't just losing David's affection, she was losing everything. Her confidence, her composure, her carefully constructed facade. This wasn't the self-assured, conniving woman I'd caught in those videos. This was someone terrified, someone who had no idea how to escape the trap closing around her. Good, let her feel that fear. Let her understand what it's like to be powerless. But I had to keep her alive. That was the delicate balance I had to maintain. I couldn't let David's anger turn violent, couldn't let him cross that line. So I began feeding Amanda small pieces of hope, anonymous warnings, hints that she could still get out, but only if she moved quickly. I watched her struggle, torn between trusting these whispers and fearing they were traps. It was cruel, perhaps, to dangle that possibility in front of her, knowing full well I'd orchestrated every moment of her suffering. But this wasn't about mercy, it was about control. By the time I was done, Amanda's world would be ashes. David would turn against her, stripping away everything she'd built with him, leaving her penniless, alone and afraid. She'd have no choice but to crawl back to me, broken, begging for the safety of the life she'd thrown away. And when she did, I'd be ready. Because that's when I'd deliver the final blow. I didn't waste any time putting my plan into action. David's paranoia was a double-edged sword I could wield against both of them. All it took were a few carefully placed suggestions, rumors that Amanda had been seen with another man, anonymous notes hinting at her secret meetings downtown. I knew where to place these whispers, the right people to contact. And each time I made sure to leave just enough ambiguity that David's mind would fill in the blanks. The first sign that things were working came one evening when Amanda stumbled in late, her face a mask of confusion and fear. I pretended not to notice as she moved around the kitchen, slamming cabinets and muttering under her breath. But I caught snippets, crazy accusations. Doesn't trust me. What's he going to do next? She was talking about David. I had sown the seeds and now I watched them sprout with twisted satisfaction. Everything okay? I asked nonchalantly, glancing up from the newspaper as if I hadn't noticed her erratic behavior. Fine, she snapped, then forced a smile. Just a rough day at work. Long day, I murmured, feigning sympathy, and you've been having a lot of those lately. The way she flinched at the comment, an almost imperceptible tightening of her shoulders, told me everything I needed to know. Whatever David was saying to her, it was hitting close to home. Over the next few days, I ramped up the pressure. I made sure David received confidential tips about Amanda's supposed financial activities, allegations that she was funneling money into a private account. It was all fiction, of course, but it didn't matter. David's paranoia made him believe it was possible, and that was enough. Then came the turning point. One night, Amanda didn't come home at all. I stayed up late, staring at the clock as the hours ticked by, imagining all the possibilities. Had David confronted her? Was she hiding out somewhere, desperate and afraid? I considered calling her, but that would tip my hand. I needed to maintain the illusion that I was the oblivious, patient husband, waiting faithfully while his wife sorted through whatever personal issues were keeping her away. It was past 3 a.m. when the front door finally creaked open. I remained on the couch pretending to be asleep, but watched her out of the corner of my eye as she crept into the living room. Her clothes were rumpled, makeup smeared. She looked exhausted, broken. "Steve?" Her voice was a whisper, tentative and unsure. "Are you awake?" I let out a soft groan, shifting on the couch as if I'd just stirred from a deep sleep. "Amanda?" I murmured, rubbing my eyes. "What time is it?" "It's late," she said, a tremor in her voice. "I'm sorry, there was a problem at work." "Work? At this hour?" I let just the right amount of suspicion creep into my tone, enough to suggest doubt without accusing. "Are you okay?" I, I don't want to talk about it," she stammered, looking away. "I just need some sleep." I watched her retreat up the stairs, her steps slow and unsteady. The woman who'd been so arrogant, so confident in her control was unraveling. Every carefully crafted lie, every manipulation, it was all coming back to haunt her, and I couldn't have planned it better. But I wasn't done yet. The next phase required more finesse. I began planting the idea that Amanda was being watched, not by me, but by someone dangerous. I left small, unsettling traces around the house. A business card from a private investigator slipped into her purse, a note on her car windshield that read, "You're not as clever as you think." I made sure she'd see them, but not know where they came from. I even installed a second GPS tracker on her car, one she could find easily to reinforce the idea that someone was tailing her. She was spiraling. I saw it in her eyes, in the way her hands shook as she held her phone, in the way she jumped at every unexpected sound. David's suspicions had turned to accusations. He was grilling her, threatening to cut her off, to expose her. I knew he was pushing her to the edge, and I knew what that kind of pressure would do to Amanda. She'd crack. She'd make a mistake. It happened sooner than I expected. I was in my office one afternoon, sifting through some of David's old business records, when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I answered cautiously, half expecting one of the anonymous tips I'd sent out to have backfired. "Steve?" Amanda's voice was barely recognizable, hoarse, panicked. "Amanda, what's going on?" I kept my tone even, neutral. He's gone crazy," she whispered. "David, he thinks God, I don't even know what he thinks anymore. He's saying I'm stealing from him, that I've been spying on him." My heart thudded. This was it. I'd pushed David just far enough. "What?" I forced a note of incredulity into my voice. "Why would he think that?" "I don't know," she cried. "He's been getting these messages, these emails. They look like they're from me, but I didn't send them, Steve, I swear. He's accusing me of setting him up." "Slow down," I said, injecting calm authority into my words. "Just take a breath. Where are you right now?" "Home, but I'm afraid, Steve. I think he might actually hurt me." The fear in her voice was genuine, raw. It should have made me feel something, sympathy, guilt, anything. But all I felt was satisfaction. She was trapped, finally seeing David for what he truly was, a threat, a man who wouldn't hesitate to eliminate a liability. And Amanda had become just that. "I'll come by," I said, making the decision instantly. "We'll figure this out. Just don't do anything rash, okay?" "No," she whispered almost to herself. "No, I need to get away. I need to leave before he finds me again." My heart sped up. She was running. If I didn't handle this carefully, everything would spiral out of control. "Amanda, listen to me," I said firmly. "Don't run. That's exactly what he's expecting you to do. You need to stay calm. Stay where you are. I'll be there in 15 minutes. She didn't answer. The line went dead. I rushed out of the house, cursing under my breath. This wasn't how I'd planned it. I needed Amanda broken, yes, but not destroyed. If she disappeared, David would come after her, hunt her down. And a man like him wouldn't leave loose ends. He'd make sure she never resurfaced. I reached the house in record time. It was dark, the curtains drawn. I approached cautiously, glancing around for any signs of David. There was none. When I knocked on the door, it swung open almost immediately. Amanda stood there, a pale ghost of the woman I once knew. "Steve," she breathed, and then she collapsed into my arms, trembling. "I don't know what to do. He's everywhere. He has people watching me, following me." "Shh, it's okay." I guided her inside, shutting the door behind us. "You're safe now." For a moment, I almost believed the words. But we weren't safe. Neither of us. Amanda had stepped into something far beyond an affair, far beyond petty deceit. And now she was tangled in David's web, a spider caught in the strands she'd spun herself. "I have to leave," she murmured, pulling away. "I can't stay here. He'll find me." "He'll kill me, Steve. You don't understand." "I do understand," I said softly. "But running won't solve anything. It'll only make him more determined. You need to face him." "Face him?" Her laugh was bitter, hysterical. "You want me to confront a man who probably has a gun in his car right now, just waiting to see me slip up?" "No," I said, tightening my grip on her shoulders. "You're not going to face him alone." She froze, eyes widening. "What are you talking about?" "I'll talk to him," I said. The lie slipped out so smoothly it almost surprised me. "I'll make him understand this is all a misunderstanding. But you have to trust me." "Trust you?" She gave a choked laugh, the sound desperate. "After everything, you're still willing to help me?" There it was, the crack I'd been waiting for. A glimpse of the Amanda I remembered, lost and vulnerable. She was falling apart, and I was the only lifeline she had left. I'd made sure of it. "Yes," I whispered, staring into her eyes. "But you need to stay here. Stay hidden. Let me handle this." "Steve, promise me," I insisted, voice hard. "Promise me you won't do anything until I come back." She swallowed, then nodded slowly. "Okay, I promise." It was all I needed. As I left the house, I felt a strange sense of exhilaration, of anticipation. Everything was falling into place. Amanda was isolated, desperate. David was unstable, unpredictable. And me? I was finally in control. I drove toward David's place, my mind racing. It was time to turn the tables. Not just on Amanda, but on him too. Because if I'd learned one thing from all of this, it was that revenge wasn't just about making them pay. It was about making them beg for it to stop. David's place was eerily silent as I pulled up. The sprawling estate, usually buzzing with activity, was still, its opulence looming like a dark fortress. I'd been here only once before during a dinner Amanda had insisted we attend early in their friendship. It felt like a lifetime ago, before everything unraveled. I killed the engine and sat in the car for a moment, heart pounding. This was it, the confrontation I'd been inching toward, the one that would bring everything into the open. I could still back out, leave Amanda to her own devices, but no, that would mean letting her win, letting them both escape without consequence. No, I needed to finish this. The front door was slightly ajar. An invitation? A warning? I moved cautiously up the driveway, glancing around for any signs of movement. None. The wind whispered through the trees, and a chill settled over me. I swallowed the unease rising in my throat and pushed the door open. David was standing in the foyer, his back to me, staring at something I couldn't see. He didn't turn when I entered. The dim lighting cast long shadows across the polished marble floor. Every instinct told me to retreat, but I forced myself to step forward, the echo of my footsteps breaking the tense silence. "David?" He turned slowly, his face inscrutable. A flicker of surprise crossed his eyes, but he masked it quickly. "Steve," he said, his voice low and measured. "I didn't expect you here." "Neither did I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "But I think it's time we talked." He laughed, a dry, humorless sound that grated on my nerves. "Talk? You? I thought you'd rather play games in the shadows, leaving those little hints, feeding me lies about Amanda." He paused, his gaze sharpening. "You think I didn't know?" I held his stare, forcing myself to remain calm. "It wasn't lies, David. Everything I sent you, every message, every piece of information was true. You've been so focused on your own paranoia, you didn't see it for what it was." "And what's that?" He took a step closer, his expression hardening. A pathetic attempt to turn me against her? To save your pitiful marriage? No, I said, shaking my head slowly. I was never trying to save anything. I wanted you to see what Amanda really is, a liar, a manipulator, someone who uses people to get what she wants. David's jaw clenched, a vein throbbing at his temple. For a moment, I thought he might lunge at me, but he remained still. You're no different, Steve. You've been pulling strings too. Or did you think I wouldn't figure that out? My pulse quickened, but I kept my expression blank. I knew you'd figure it out eventually. You're not stupid. That's why I came here, to finish this. He raised an eyebrow, his gaze flickering with interest. Finish what exactly? Amanda, I said simply. We both know she's playing us against each other. We both know she's trying to weasel her way out, to take what she can before vanishing into thin air. David's eyes narrowed, suspicion and curiosity warring on his face. En va chercher. Go on. You want her gone, don't you? I took a step forward, keeping my voice low and controlled. You want to cut your losses before she drags you down with her. I'm giving you an out. I have all the evidence I need to bury her, financial records, secret accounts she's set up, conversations that prove she's been planning to steal from you. He didn't respond immediately, his gaze calculating. I could see the wheels turning in his mind, weighing the offer, considering his options. And what's in it for you? He asked finally. I allowed myself a small smile. Freedom. Once she's out of our lives, we can both move on. She's been using you, David, the same way she used me. She doesn't love you. She never did. She's only ever loved herself. He exhaled sharply, the tension radiating off him in waves. I could see the doubt, the rage simmering just beneath the surface. But there was something else too, something I hadn't counted on. David's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't one of agreement. It was cold, predatory. You really think I didn't know? He murmured. You think I didn't see right through her the moment we met? You underestimate me, Steve. Amanda was a project, a test. She was never going to take anything from me because I never gave her anything real. I froze, the weight of his words crashing over me like ice water. She's been chasing a fantasy I dangled in front of her face, he continued, stepping closer. Money, power, security, all of it was an illusion. And she bought it just like you did. That's what made it so delicious. Watching her jump through hoops, thinking she was one step away from paradise. His eyes locked onto mine, and I saw the truth. Amanda had been outplayed from the very beginning. He'd never been the mark. She had. And now, I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady, now that she's no use to you? He smiled again, the cruelty in it unmistakable. Now she's become a liability, but I don't need your help to deal with her. I can make her disappear anytime I want. My heart pounded in my chest. Amanda was in real danger. And I led her right into it. All my planning, all my manipulation, it had been for nothing. David wasn't losing control. He was tightening his grip. So why haven't you, I asked, grasping for leverage. If you're so sure you can get rid of her, why haven't you done it already? Because, he said softly, his gaze turning inward, as if savoring a private thought, I wanted to see how far she'd go, how much she'd betray, how much she'd degrade herself, before realizing she'd lost everything. But you, Steve, you've complicated things. How so? He sighed, almost as if he pitied me. Because now I have to deal with you too. I'd hoped you'd stay in the shadows, keep playing your little games. But now that you're here, I'm forced to make a decision. What decision? Whether to let you walk away or end this once and for all. The threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. My palms were slick with sweat, but I couldn't back down now. I'd come too far to falter. I have everything, I said quietly. If something happens to me, if something happens to Amanda, it all goes public. Every dirty secret, every piece of evidence linking you to illegal activities, to disappearances, to people who've crossed you. It's all documented. And I've made sure it'll reach the right hands. David's smile faded. His eyes turned cold, assessing me like one would a bug they were about to squash. "You're bluffing," he murmured, but there was a note of uncertainty in his voice. "You think you can scare me with empty threats?" "It's not a threat, David," I said, stepping closer, forcing myself to stand firm. "It's a guarantee. You take one step toward me, and everything you've built comes crashing down." We stood there, locked in a silent battle of wills. I knew I had to hold my ground. If he sensed even a hint of weakness, it would be over. Finally, David nodded almost imperceptibly. "Fine, you want her? Take her. But know this, Steve. She's already ruined. Whatever you think you're saving her from, she's already gone too far. She'll drag you down with her, just like she tried with me." I swallowed hard, relief and dread mixing in equal measure. "I'll take that chance." "Then get out of my house," he spat, turning away. "And tell Amanda that if I see her again, I won't be as merciful." I backed away slowly, my heart hammering. As soon as I was out the door, I ran to my car, adrenaline surging through me. David was letting us go, but I knew it was temporary. He was too dangerous, too unstable. This wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for now, Amanda and I had a chance. A slim one, but a chance nonetheless. When I finally made it back to the house, Amanda was waiting in the doorway, eyes wide with terror. I pulled her into the car without a word, started the engine, and sped away. "Where are we going?" she whispered, clutching at my arm. "Somewhere safe," I muttered, my thoughts racing. I didn't know where that was, or what the next step would be. All I knew was that we needed to get away, put as much distance between us and David as possible. Amanda leaned back against the seat, eyes closed. "You did it," she murmured, a ghost of a smile crossing her lips. "You saved me." But as I glanced at her, I realized something chilling. I hadn't saved her. I just traded one prison for another. Amanda's eyes flicked open as the car slowed to a stop at a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of place where people came to disappear, far from prying eyes, far from anyone who might be looking for us. The neon vacancy sign buzzed and sputtered in the darkness, casting an eerie glow over her pale face. "Here?" she asked softly, her voice thick with exhaustion and something close to disbelief. "Just for tonight," I muttered, avoiding her gaze. "We need to lay low." "David's not going to let this go easily." She nodded absently, staring out the window. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked utterly lost. The once sharp edges of her personality, the vanity, the manipulation had dulled, replaced by a hollow fragility. A strange pang of pity twisted in my chest. She had made this mess, but I was the one who'd thrown her into the deep end. And now, despite everything, she was looking at me like I was her only salvation. Maybe I was. We checked in under fake names, and I handed over cash for a room in the farthest corner of the lot. As soon as we stepped inside, Amanda sank onto the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the peeling wallpaper. I stood near the door, watching her, unsure what to say. "Steve, what now?" she whispered, voice breaking on my name. "What do we do?" What do we do? That question brought a bitter smile to my lips. There was no we. There never had been. She'd made sure of that when she chose David, when she spun her web of lies around me. But even as I thought it, the words felt hollow. "Now," I repeated, more to myself than to her, "now we figure out how to survive." Amanda's shoulders slumped and she buried her face in her hands. For a moment, the silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken regrets. She looked so broken, so defeated that it was almost impossible to remember the woman who'd once toyed with my life so easily. "Steve, I'm sorry." The words were so quiet I barely heard them. "For everything. Sorry." I'd waited so long to hear her say that, to admit even once that she'd wronged me. And now that she had, I felt nothing, no vindication, no closure, just a strange emptiness that echoed through me. "Doesn't matter now, Amanda." My voice was flat. "We've gone too far to look back." Her eyes flicked up to meet mine, wide and desperate. "But you're here. You didn't have to come, but you did. Why?" Why? Because despite everything, a part of me hadn't let go of the idea of saving her. because some twisted part of me needed to be the one to pull her out of the fire, if only to prove to myself that I could, that I still had control. Because David's dangerous, I said instead, keeping my voice steady. You were right. He could have killed you if I hadn't stepped in. And now he'll come after both of us, she whispered, shivering. What if, what if we can't get away? We will, I said firmly, even though I wasn't sure I believed it. We'll lay low until things cool off. After that, we'll figure out our next move. Together? Her gaze searched mine, and something in her eyes made me hesitate. Was that hope or something darker? Did she really think we could go back to the way things were? Pretend none of this had happened? I turned away, running a hand through my hair. I need some air. I stepped out onto the balcony, leaving her alone in the room. The cool night air stung my lungs as I leaned against the rusted railing, staring into the darkness. My mind was racing, replaying every decision I'd made up until this point, every manipulation, every deceit. Had it all been worth it? I thought back to that first night of suspicion, to the hours I'd spent obsessing over Amanda's betrayal. The anger, the bitterness, it had driven me, given me purpose. But what now? The revenge I'd envisioned was supposed to end with her begging for forgiveness, groveling at my feet, and me walking away triumphant. But instead, I'd found myself back at her side, protecting her from a man more dangerous than I'd ever imagined. David had shattered the illusion I'd built around my revenge, reduced it to rubble with a few simple truths. I wasn't the puppet master. I was just another pawn in a game I didn't understand. The realization sent a wave of nausea through me. What had I become in my quest for retribution? I'd lost myself in it, let it consume me until there was nothing left but a hollow shell, filled with rage and desperation. And now, standing here in the aftermath, I felt no satisfaction, no sense of victory. I was still trapped, still defined by Amanda's betrayal. And worse, I dragged her deeper into the chaos with me. I thought about leaving, just walking away, abandoning her to face whatever fate David had in store. She'd chosen this path, hadn't she? She'd chosen to betray me, to fall for his lies. But even as I considered it, a cold knot of guilt twisted in my gut. Because deep down, I knew that if I left her now, it wouldn't be an act of liberation. It would be surrender. Surrender to the darkness that had taken root in me, that had driven me to become someone I barely recognized. No. I couldn't do that. Not to her, not to myself. I had to find a way out, for both of us. The next few days blurred together in a haze of sleepless nights and tense silences. We stayed in that dingy motel, only venturing out for food and necessities, constantly looking over our shoulders. Amanda seemed to shrink in on herself, her once vibrant personality reduced to a shadow of fear and regret. It was on the fourth day that I realized I couldn't keep running. Not from David, not from Amanda, not from the person I'd become. I had to make a choice. Let this darkness define me or take control of my life once more. So I made a decision, a real one. I'm leaving what I said, dropping the bombshell one evening as we sat in the cramped room, the sound of traffic from the nearby highway our only company. Amanda's head snapped up, eyes wide with panic. What? No, Steve, you can't. I'm not running anymore, Amanda, I interrupted, voice firm. I'm done letting your mistakes and David's threats control my life. Her lips parted, and for a moment, I saw the old Amanda, sharp, defiant surface. But then it faded, replaced by something raw and vulnerable. You're just leaving me. I'm giving you a chance to start over, I said quietly. I've set up an account for you, enough money to get by until you figure things out. It's not much, but it'll keep you on your feet. But what about David? She whispered, voice trembling. What if he finds me? I swallowed hard, pushing down the surge of guilt. That's not my problem anymore, Amanda. You wanted freedom. Well, now you have it. What you do with it is up to you. She stared at me, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. I thought you came back for me. I came back to end this, I said, forcing the words out. And now I'm doing that, my way. For a long, painful moment, she said nothing. Then she nodded slowly, shoulders sagging in defeat. Okay, Steve, I understand. But did she? Did I? The truth was, I didn't know if this was the right thing to do. I didn't know if walking away now would be my redemption or my final mistake. But I did know one thing. I couldn't keep being a slave to the past, to the anger that had consumed me. I hope you find what you're looking for, she murmured as I turned to leave. I really do. I paused at the door, the weight of everything I'd been through pressing down on me. For a second, I almost looked back. Almost. But then I stepped outside, letting the door close behind me. The air felt different, lighter somehow. I took a deep breath, staring up at the clear night sky. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know if I'd ever be able to move past this, to rebuild the shattered pieces of my life. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of something I'd thought I'd lost forever. Hope. As I walked away from that motel, from Amanda, from everything that had defined me for so long, I knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be days when the darkness would creep back in, whispering doubts and regrets. But I'd faced it once, and I could do it again. One step at a time, I told myself. One day at a time. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have answers. But I had myself, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. I glanced back one last time, the motel fading into the distance, and smiled. The past was behind me, and the future was mine.